Welcome to another MCOL podcast edition. Today, Rong will be discussing Chinese healthcare and more with MCOL's Clive Riddle. Dr. Rong is the principal responsible for Milliman's Greater China Healthcare Analytics practice. She joined Milliman in 2009. She will also be discussing Chinese healthcare and more in future posts for MCOL blog.
This is Clive Riddle, president of MCOL, and we're featuring another MCOL podcast. This will become a series, and I'm so pleased to have with us Rong, principal at Milliman, who I've had the pleasure of knowing for a number of years, and we're excited to have her talking with us about Chinese healthcare, as well as other initiatives she's involved with. And Rong, welcome, and we're really happy to talk with you today.
Oh, thank you for having me, Clive. It's a pleasure to be here.
Let's start with talking about your interest in Chinese healthcare and maybe give us a little backstory in what's driven that interest.
Oh, sure. It feels like telling my life story. Well, I grew up in China. I attended college there, and it's been many years ago. Don't want to date myself. But so after I came to the US and started a healthcare career, it was around 2005. That was like the first time that I got invited to provide analytic training to a group of executives back then in China with a focus on healthcare. So at the time, people thought, at least at the time, that China would have a booming commercial health insurance market. And then a few years later, while I was attending an international conference in Beijing on health economics, I was sitting in the audience, and the conference chair was announcing there that China was back in, I would say, in 2009. And the chair was announcing at the meeting that the Chinese government will push for almost like universal health insurance, health coverage, not insurance, health coverage. And they want to roll it out in 2 years' time. And I was sitting in the audience. I was thinking, wow, with this massive country and the huge population, how are they going to even do that? But they achieved it. So with the government providing basic social health insurance, the market, the commercial market, as you would see, is actually getting a hit. So since then, the commercial health insurance market had been somewhat struggling a little bit, trying to figure out exactly where they could be, coming in to supplement. And then I came back to the US and, I was very busy with implementing the ACA and working with clients on payment reform and so on. And then back in, I think it was 4 years ago, a contact in China reached out to me and said, hey, China's commercial health insurance market is booming again. Do you want to take a look? And he said that he even presented the materials that I basically presented like in 2005 to his new boss, the chairman of one of the largest insurance companies in China. And the chairman was very impressed and interested and intrigued. So my contact said, do you want to come and maybe talk to us about healthcare analytics and how we can use that, grow our business? So that started my I got re-engaged, in other words, in the China market. And so I went and did a lot of explorations and came back with really interesting information. And colleagues of mine, quite a few of them, shared similar interests. So we established the China Healthcare Analytics practice within Milliman. So we started doing work in the China market, not only mainland China, but also Taiwan and Hong Kong, so Chinese speaking, if you will, in a region. And so here we go. It's been 2.5 years now.
So
things are going.
Help tell everyone who's listening what started you in healthcare and analytics. What got you on that path?
Yeah, that's interesting. So I had my degree in economics, and I did my dissertation with a healthcare focus. or health insurance focus, or in other words, in the topic I researched looked into had to do with in developing economies, if there wasn't a formal health insurance scheme, and where it's, the economy is basically labor intensive, and if people are sick and they would have to take time off of work, and so they would lose the income from the labor market, they would also have to spend more. So in that kind of situation, you would very easily observe almost a downward spiral where things are just going to get worse. So in situations like that, how did people react? How did people cope with mechanism? So I researched into the mechanism, informal income smoothing mechanisms, where people potentially would have savings, or they would be able to borrow money from relatives who they sort of have a way of insuring against each other. So I looked into that, and then my first job was with DXCG, where I was a senior scientist, and I did a lot of predictive analytics. If you recall, we did some work back then.
That's when I first met you.
That's right, yes. And risk adjustment back then. And that's how my career sort of shaped these days. It's client and interesting problems and so on. So I sort of move on from topic to topic. So
Rong will be talking with everyone about these issues on a recurring basis in our MCOL blog. And Rong, what do you think you might be talking about in upcoming times when you are posting about that?
Right. I think China is so big. There's certainly a lot of things relating to healthcare that could be discussed. So there will be things like, how is China financing or paying for its healthcare? We always wanted to have a perspective where you compare and contrast to the US or other developed economies. Things like, in addition to financing, there's also the delivery and where things are falling short and where they were probably more successful or more innovative, and the growth of the health insurance market, which actually somewhat resembles the market that I would say in some regard resembles the pre-ACA market where medical underwriting was allowed. But then China has its own characteristics. And we can also talk about technology, because there's a lot of data, obviously, that's available, and apps, if you will, that's sitting on top of these data, trying to understand risks and stratifying patients and so on, and providing education. And there are also innovative, I would say, market solutions to the fact that coverage within the social health insurance scheme is lacking. So things like what we call risk mutuals. There are things that leverage social media platforms and blockchain technology to validate claims and put it all together and operate very cheaply in kind of a mutual insurance scheme, but they're not calling it insurance. It's called a risk mutual. So things like that are pretty interesting, that may have may teach us something here in the US as well. So, I'd be talking to people about this through the monthly blog.
Sure. Now, you've touched on comparing and contrasting a little, but for those listening who probably have, very little understanding of the system, how would you, in a nutshell, describe it compared to the US system? I mean, what is the most similar and what's the most different components?
I think the most similar is probably population structure, and not in a similar way, but the similar kinds of issues that challenges the U.S. healthcare system also challenges countries like China or other more developed economies. So things like escalating healthcare spending, things are just becoming more expensive. And then there's also aging of the population and decline birth rate and the kind of the economic challenges the central government is facing. Central government actually is responsible for procuring and spending the financing and payment of the basic social health insurance scheme. So I think in here, we're looking at CMS struggling, trying various ways to manage Medicare and ACOs and so on. So there's a lot of similarities in that regard, so like general trends. But what what China also is doing is rapidly digitizing the data stream. So the electronic health record systems, there's a ton of the different systems out there for different specialties, different departments, different regions, which is not dissimilar at all here in the US. And there's also the illness profile, if you will. Like, China, it's been 40 years now. If you look at the incidence rates in terms of leading cause of death, prevalence of conditions, you would notice that it's the chronic diseases and lifestyle-based conditions that are driving the spending and mortality, which is also very similar to the US. And the population also is, China at this point probably is more than 60%, close to 70% urbanized. That's, and people are, lifestyles are pretty similar to the US. So, people are concerned about the environment, concerned about lifestyle, concerned about diet and so on. So there's like these things that we see here as well in the US. So yeah, similarities there.
Yeah, there's much more in common really hearing you talk than I would have thought 15 minutes ago. Is there though a major challenge they're facing that you feel we don't have?
Well, that's a great question. I think there's so many things that that they are facing, but the U.S. isn't. The U.S. probably has relied a lot more on the market to solve a lot of its problems. The government can't really solve every problem. But I think in China, one of the biggest debate in the healthcare field is still about the role of government. How much of a role should the market play? In fact, I was actually part of a kind of academic research team to look at where the market could be providing solutions to China's healthcare coverage and provision. That was actually, kind of still a very contentious debate. But here in the U.S., I think it's much, much less, because the U.S. has always adopted a more market-driven approach to healthcare.
Well, thanks. I think that's all very helpful to know kind of where you're going to be coming from. Have you been able to, as we sort of emerge from this pandemic, are you able now to start getting out in the field, or are you still having to base yourself just tethered at home?
I'm tethered at home, and it's been more than 18 months since I set foot in China. I can't wait to go back. But again, it's a very, I would say, for Milliman, for myself, it's a very interesting time to look at China. And certainly we have the kind of the political tension between the two countries going back. But what we do here is very, I would say, not high tech. We're not in the in that area. So I think that hopefully our business is not affected. Fingers crossed.
All right. Well, thanks so much. And we're going to really look forward to hearing what you have to say over the coming months, Rong.
Thank you. It will be exciting to work with you. And I hope that I have something to share that will be valuable to all the community, the MCOL community.
All right. This is Clive Riddle, president of MCOL. And this concludes our podcast for today. And thank you again, Rong.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
You've been listening to an MCOL podcast with Dr. Rong Yi, in which MCOL's Clive Riddle asks her about Chinese healthcare and more. Watch for her future posts at mcolblog.com.